Okay, boys and girls, we are working on 7-12 and we are comparing decimals, specifically greater than 1 whole. So, the easiest way to do this, and you can do this with other decimals too, is to line them up by their place. Ones, ones, tenths, tenths. So I'm going to line them up by that. I'm going to put the ones place here and the tenths place here. So I take 3.5, 4.5, and I start at the greater number. So which one's bigger? Which place is bigger, the ones place or the tenths place? The ones place. And I compare looking at the numbers in the ones. So which one's bigger, 3 or 4? 4 is the bigger number. So in the end, the decimal 4.5 would be greater than the decimal 3.5. Okay? Now let's look at this one. This is the ones place. This is the tens place. This is the ones place. This is the tenths place. So I'm going to line them up by their place value on the side and stack them on top of each other so they're not horizontal, they're now going to be vertical. So I put 7.8, 7.2. I look at the ones place first because that's the greatest place value. And I have 7 and 7. And guess what? They are equal to each other. So I move next door to the tenths place. And I look, 8 and 2. Which one's bigger? You're right, 8's the bigger number. So 7.8 would be greater than 7.2. Okay, same concept. We're going to line them up by the place. This is the ones, tenths, hundredths. Oh, but don't let this one trick you. This one's the tens place. Oops, wrong color. Tens place, then the ones place, then the tenths place. So I need to line them up by their colors, starting with the greater amount. So I have the tens, ones, then I'd have my decimal point, then I have my tenths, and hundredths. So let's line them up. Start here, 6, 7, decimal point, 3. This one I line it up, 6, decimal point, 0, 4. Notice I kept these with each other because they're both in the ones place. There is an imaginary 0 here and an imaginary 0 here. They just fill in those blank spots. So I start by comparing my tens place. I have 6 and an imaginary 0. Which one's bigger? You're right, the 6 is bigger than that imaginary 0. So since that 6 is bigger, 67 and 3/10 would have been greater than 6 and 4/100. Do you see how I'm lining them up by their place value? That is a really, really, really important step in comparing these fractions or decimals greater than 1. Now I want to compare this one real fast. This one is not greater than 1, but I think this is a good point to make. I have the fraction 7/10 and 70/100. Okay, we're going to underline their places. I have the tenths place, the hundredths place. I need to line them up. So my decimal point comes here, then I would have my tenths and my hundredths. So I'm going to write them underneath, stacking them on top. So I have 0.7, 0.70. If I look at this, I can see, and I'm starting at comparing at my tenths place because it's the greater value, I have 7 and 7. They're both equal to each other, so I move on. Remember, there is an imaginary 0 here. So in the hundredths place, I have a 0 and a 0. Well, they're equal to each other. Since they're equal, you put the equal sign between them. They're the same exact thing. Okay, so that's why it's important. Line them up. Remember, if there's nothing there, put in an imaginary 0. That's fine. Okay, now we're going to look at this. This gives you a graph right here. And it wants you to order from the longest distance to the shortest distance. So we need to compare these numbers. So I'm going to rewrite them to the side. And I'm going to make sure to check on their place. So the 0 would come here, then the decimal point. If you look, all these decimal points will line up. 0, 7. And it's really important to stay really neat with your handwriting on this so you don't get them mixed up. It's just like when you learn to add or subtract. You really want to keep columns together so you can see, and like you can see, I have all my ones right there, all my tenths right there, all my hundredths right there. Okay? Keep really organized. Then the last one. So I'm going to start at the greatest value, which is the ones place. So I look and I can see a 6, a 2, and then 2 zeros. Well, I know the longest distance is going to be 6 79/100. So that would be Sophia. The next longest would be Talia, because look, right there, she has 2.5. The rest are zeros. They're tied right now. But right now I know this is the biggest, this is the next biggest. So now we have to determine between just these two middle numbers. So I look at this place. I have a 0 and a 3. Which one's bigger? You're right, the 3. So the next would be Lucy. And the shortest distance would be Gabby. So I want you to try a few on your own. Let's do 35.7, and I want you to compare it with 6.37. Remember, there are 1, 2, 3 digits, but make sure to line them up in the right place value. That's the only hint I'm going to give you right now. Your turn to try it out, though. Make sure to pause the video, try it on your own, and then turn it back on and check your work. Okay, so I'm lining it up by place. I know this is tens, ones, and then tenths. This one right here starts in the ones place, so I'm going to keep it the same color. Just like that. Now I'm going to line them up by the color, meaning I have my tens, ones, then I'd have my decimal point, then I have my tenths, and my hundredths. So I'm going to follow my colors that I had before, 35.7, and I can imagine there's an imaginary 0 there. Then the next one, I have an imaginary 0 here, and I'm keeping the colors, 6, decimal point, 3, 7. I always start at the greatest place value, which would be the tenths. Right here I have a 3 and a 0. Which one's bigger? You're right, that 3 is bigger. So in the end, 35 and 7/10 would have been bigger than 6 and 37/100. Okay, let's try another one. This will be the last one. I want you to do 7.5, and I want you to compare it with 750 and decide what you think is the bigger one. Pause it, try it on your own, and then turn the video back on. Okay, so I'm underlining the place values. I have my ones place, my ones place. My tenths place, my tenths place. And then this one goes to the hundredths, but that one didn't. So now I'm going to write those lines down here. make sure I put my decimal point, and I'm going to fill in the numbers underneath it. So I have 7.5, 7.50. Because there's nothing here, I'm just going to fill a 0 on top. I can look and automatically see I have a 7 and a 7. They're the same. 5 and a 5. They're the same. 0 and a 0. They're the same. So this number is the exact same value. Now some of you might be wondering why, and I want to explain that to you real fast. Remember that these in the end represent fractions. Decimals represent fractions. So the decimal for this, well, the decimal would change to this fraction. 7 wholes with 5 tenths. Because there's 5 right here, and it's in the tenths place. This one would change to 7 and 50 hundredths. Now you might be saying, Mrs. Anderson, they're not the same. 5 and 50 hundredths are not the same. Well, you could either create an equivalent fraction for this one, or simplify them, and they might end up the same. I want you to think to yourself, I have 5 tenths, and I want to turn it to 50 hundredths. Can I multiply 5 by anything to get to 50? Yeah, I can. The answer would be 10. Well, what if I multiplied the denominator by 10? It would give me 100. So they're equal to each other. Or I could have seen I could simplify. So I take 50 hundredths. And I could simplify it by dividing each side by 10. 50 divided by 10 gives me 5. 100 divided by 10 gives me 10. They're equal to each other. I just changed 50 hundredths to make it 5 tenths. In the end, even though they look like they're probably different, they are the same. They can be simplified or they can be turned to be equivalent fractions. Okay, I hope this helps. See you guys later. Message me on Google Hangouts if you need it. Bye.